book launch. This is a very, very special moment. People watching live, big thanks to Scheltema, because this is an amazing space that I didn't even know existed. And it's, you know, I was going to say it's almost like an emotional thing for me to actually formally launch my book, which is called Managing Product equals Managing Tension, here from Scheltema in my beloved Amsterdam. Because guys on the panel and guys watching at home or in the office, you don't want to know how much money I've spent at Scheltema over the years. They used to be in the Koningsplein, and I thought, if I'm going to do this book launch, it has to be in Amsterdam, it has to be at Scheltema. It's also in memory of my dad, who passed away earlier this year due to the virus, because part of me also felt like thinking about how much money I spent in Scheltema over the years before I moved to London. I was also thinking about my dad, who I just dragged along with me and had to spend his money for me on books. So, pap, jongen, deze is voor jou. What we're going to do today, we're going to talk about my book, as I said, but what I didn't want to do today is sit here and pontificate and talk about my book and do a very boring kind of standard book presentation. So I've got this amazing panel here composed of product managers, product designers. I'll do proper introductions in a minute, but we've got Ilze, we've got Gal, we've got Kevin, and we've got Blaine. But first I want to briefly talk about the book, just to set the scene a little bit before we go into the conversation. And when I say conversation, we'll probably start off with some questions, have a panel conversation, and we'd love to get any questions from people watching the live stream. There's a number that you can call if you're in the Netherlands, and you can pass through your questions there. Equally, you can leave a comment on YouTube. You can ping me on LinkedIn. I'll try to have a look at that. Whichever source you use, but it'd be great to get some audience questions as well that we as a panel can then go through. But the book. So I started with my first book. That's where I started writing about product management. This was about 2 years ago, my product management toolkit. And that was very much about the role of a product person, because that's a role that's quite ambiguous, to say the least. And in that book, I talk a lot about what a product manager is and isn't, because I don't know if everyone watching this event is familiar with product management or has worked with product managers or product people before, but it's quite a unique role where you're constantly working with UX or designers. We've got 2 on the panel today. Working with engineers, people who have to implement, working with business stakeholders, working with customers, and you're effectively in the middle. You're constantly navigating around all those areas and working with those people. And I wrote about that in my first book, and then I realized, starting to talk to more people about this book, about it's lovely to write about a toolkit and all the great things you can do as a product manager, but the reality of being a product person, whether you're a product manager, a product designer, or an engineer, is a lot more frustrating at times. And that prompted me to write. I see nodding faces here in the panel, like, yeah, we all feel the pain. And that prompted me to write this second book. So we're going to talk today about topics that I cover in this second book, Managing Product equals Managing Tension. Topics like, what are the common tensions when we're developing products, be it a digital product, let's say a website or an app, or I work on a physical product, I'm building a car, let's say. The principles are the same, the tensions are often the same. How do we manage those tensions? Is it something that we need to be afraid of and try to avoid as much as possible, or are there even ways to make the most of that tension and use that tension for good? And like I said, I'm not going to do that on my own, because I've got some amazing panelists here with me today. Thank you guys so much for wanting to be on the panel. I've got Kevin here, Kevin Hawkins. Kevin works at bookclub.com, where he leads UX for 2 consumer-facing products. He also has his own design agency, bundling over 12 years. 12, that's a lot, Kevin. 12 years of digital design experience. I'm impressed. But I know there's a lot more experience in this room anyway, because next to Kevin we've got Gal Lacmon. Gal is a senior product designer at SurveyMonkey, who I think have their office just across this building, so that's very convenient. But Gal has worked on a range of products across mobile and web, and has really focused on designing the end-to-end customer experience. To my left, got my homie Blaine Holt. Blaine is the head of product at Hedge Studio, which is a digital showroom for fashion brands. Blaine started his professional career, this is a good one, as a personal insurance consultant. But he very quickly got into digital and has fulfilled a number of product positions over the years. And last but not least, Ilze Dreyer. Ilze is the director of product management at TripActions, which is a B2B platform that helps businesses manage their travel and expenses. And prior to TripActions, Ilze worked as a product manager at Booking.com, and she has a wealth of experience when it comes to product management, because I know you've done a number of product roles. So again, thank you so much for being on the panel. I want to kick off with some questions based on the book, based on your experience. Tell me honestly, because this is a safe space, you can tell it's a safe space. When was the last time you felt tension when managing or developing a product? I can tell you, for me, it was yesterday, when I, had to really support one of the product owners in my team. I manage a team of 16 product people, mix of product designers and product owners, who really struggle with some stakeholders who wanted him to really focus on the BAU side of things, so business as usual, making little tweaks to the product and the experience, where this product owner wanted to do much more than that. He wanted to innovate, he wanted to personalize the experience. So again, that's a tension, right? How do you manage that trade-off? Tell me honestly, Kevin, when was the last time you felt tension?
I feel like tension is like an everyday thing. Every time we experience the site ourselves, there's a bit of tension, because we're both a problem solver, but also trying to be the user. And then when you have feedback that collides with your own, that tension kind of carries itself into every day.
Right. So it's almost self-created tension to some degree, by the sounds of it. Or different hats. How about you, Ilze? When was the last time, and be honest with us, you felt tension?
So Hannah Gadsby, I think she's a comedian, and she calls it about tension and release. And basically, as a product manager, everything is about tension and release. Because half of the time, you're working towards something, and that is building up the tension. Then you launch something, and it's the release. And so you go in this endless loop. Sorry. But I think now, during COVID, I think it's becoming a completely different thing, because there's not just tension in product, there's tension in teams, there's tension in how people manage their time. And now, as I think a product leader or a leader in your team, it becomes almost how do you kind of calm the tension, or how do you make it healthy at the moment, because we're all feeling a lot of stress, not just in our product life, in our professional life, but also in our personal life.
Thank you for that. And I like the analogy of that kind of tension and release that you talked about before. We had some technical tensions there. But that is very true. It is that kind of valley of doubt, isn't it? I like the little noises as well. Blaine, last time you felt tension?
Yeah, I think it's a everyday thing, of course. Would have been yesterday, and just a common product discussion about onboarding a new customer, and then taking their challenges on board, which everything they bring to the table is fine, it's correct, they have these challenges you want to solve, and then having to take that and then definitely go between the short-termness and then the long-termness, and sort of jumping between that, really kind of drive that conversation that way as well, kind of going, hey guys, remember we have a bigger picture, we also have some core business goals, so make sure this conversation doesn't get quite siloed in there, and let's bring it up a bit, and that can also cause a bit of vagueness and uncertainty when those people go into those conversations the next day, which was today. So I think in general, a lot of the tension I feel, especially on a daily basis, is that short-term to long-term shift that is constantly happening.
Excellent. And we'll definitely come back to your point you made, Blaine, about the uncertainty, because that's a really key one. Gal, I don't think I've asked you yet about, tell us honestly.
Yeah, actually, it's funny because I'm thinking about it. Of course, it happens daily. We have a lot of tension, healthy one between product, design, and engineering, trying to make decisions together. But we've just yesterday quickly released a banner trying to get our customers to move to a new platform that we're delivering. And we got immediately amount of feedback from customer via the customer success manager. So there's tons of tension. Our engineering manager wants to push for this new product, so she wants to keep the banner. I was making sure that the banner is removable and that we can collect feedback via this. My product manager is just trying to make sure that all customer success managers are relaxed and they know what to answer to the customer. And this is just like a really silly example of how a day-to-day tension between the three of us looks like.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And it's quite apt that we've got a sofa here, because it's already, and we're only like 10 minutes in, starting to feel like a therapy session for product people, which is amazing. Because the reason why I believe that product management is so prone to some of the tensions and the examples that you just mentioned is, and this is the central thesis of the book, if you like, is it's the combination, it's lovely there on the screen behind us, of mind, matter, and moves. So it's the mind of ourselves, and you alluded to this, Kevin, of people that we work with. The matter, so what is the product made of? If you work on a digital product, let's say a website or an app, it's code, but you could equally working, making a book or that jug of water. What is it made of, and how flexible is that matter? And then moves. So those are the things that we do or don't do in relation to our product, the decisions that we make, the trade-offs that we make. And I believe, and I write about that extensively in the book, that each of these components in its own right can cause a lot of tension, especially if you combine them, that it's just explosive, it can be. If you had to pick one of those three components, mind, matter, moves, just keep it brief. Tell me which one would you pick as the most common one in what you do with your designer, product manager. Where do you think most of the tension is coming from? Mind, matter, or moves? Blaine, can I start with you?
It's a hard one because sometimes I think I'm the biggest problem, my own mind. That kind of gets in the way, but I'd say on a day-to-day it's the moves. That's the most common tension, especially given where we are today at Hatch. It's very much a startup, so moves matter. So if X versus Y, you do one, you will sacrifice the other. So I find that the most common one.
And do you feel you get better? Do you feel you get better at making moves?
I hope so. I think that's the key one. There's always a sense of imposter syndrome, right? Like you're like, oh, am I right? But I think you do get better. I think you get used to experiencing the tension and kind of understanding very quickly the pros and cons of what's happening. But it's definitely an over time thing. You won't get that straight away.
Gal, what's the most common one you've identified? Mind, matter, or moves?
I think it depends on who is the stakeholder.
This is a classic for the audience at home. This is a classic product example. It depends. Go on, Gal.
But if I had to choose one, I'd say mind is really something that can change the tension. So someone's mindset and how they see a certain product or a certain problem or a certain thing we're trying to deliver. If you don't start with the same mindset and you're not aligned on what's your motive or where you're coming from or what are you trying to solve, then two people can have a completely different mindset on the same topic of discussion, thinking they're solving the same problem, or thinking they have the right conversation, and when actually they have a completely different goal in mind. So when we keep our minds aligned or we try to communicate that better, that's where the challenge reduces a lot.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. Ilze, how about you?
Let's see if it works. I think it works. I would say it's mind, because it's like, for me, product management is almost like playing chess.
So, and your stakeholders and your teams and your other product managers, designers are all pieces on this chessboard, and you're all kind of trying to move forward or reaching some kind of goal. So if you can kind of, control the situation and the environment, the matter, and the moves with your mind, I think you're kind of in control, or as in control as product managers can be, of a situation as possible. And I also think if you can change your mindset or your attitude to situations, that is such a powerful tool, because you feel you're stuck or you can't do something. If you could just shift your mindset a little bit, or your attitude, then usually that whole chessboard kind of opens up again with opportunities.
Thank you. Kevin.
I'm going to go ahead and agree also with mind. And I like this segue with chess. I kind of relate this to the Queen's Gambit. So like when you're stuck mentally, the matter doesn't actually move the way you want it to. And I think that the idea of people having different ideas in their mind about where the roadmap is, where priorities are today, and whether we should build something temporarily or build it for the long term, that the thought process is the biggest impediment, not necessarily the actual moves.
And let's focus on the mind a bit more. How does that manifest itself? Can we give an honest example where you work with the stakeholder, someone who you really need to take on a journey that, as Ilze says, you can't necessarily control, but you need him or her and to influence him or her to get a product over the line and do well by the customer? Tell me a bad stakeholder story where there's clearly no alignment, as Gal said. I've had very shouty ones over the years, but maybe that's the result of me working with them, I don't know. How about you, Kevin?
Yeah, shouty ones I can relate to. As someone who comes from the agency freelance world and then was at Booking and now is back with startups, I play this mind game in my head about how to approach or present something to convince someone that this is the right way. And then there's people who are very adamant because this is the way things have always been. And I think that's like the most fun one. Fun.
Yeah, it's all relative, but yeah, I love anyone else, any juicy examples of where the mind becomes a real issue with stakeholders, people in the teams that we work with? Ilze?
I've got one. So I think a lot of what we do is working with people that come from different generations of IT. So you get like the chino pants, check shirt, like pen pocket people.
But not like you're generalizing or anything, no.
No, but I'm trying to give you like an idea of almost the caricatures that
Yeah.
you get like in our universe. I think Blaine would probably have a lot is where he's working as well. And I think it's more about how do you translate what you need to get out of them in a language that they can understand. Because I think if you can kind of shift how you speak to them, and that it's not about you and what you want, but kind of translate what you need in a language that they can understand, then suddenly that kind of friction that you feel with stakeholders gets less shouty, because they don't feel that it's combative or frictionful. It's more that you're trying to actually make an effort to speak their language to actually get what you want out of the situation.
But how do you, because you cover a good point there, which I also talk about in the book, which effectively is whether you call it empathy or influencing without authority. Have you got any practical tips or even do's and don'ts of how you do that? So you talk about speaking the language. Maybe can you give the others a bit of thinking time? How do you start that? Because let's say I'm fairly junior as a product person and Kevin is my stakeholder. I'm really in awe of Kevin and I don't know how to even start changing my language to really influence Kevin, but I need him.
So for me, there's two things that a product manager needs to be really good at. Storytelling, if you can tell a really good story, and if you can do black and white data. Most of the times, nobody can argue with black and white data. If you put the data on the table, then we speak the same language because it's numbers and it's clear. And then if you can tell a good story about why you should follow me, it's kind of inspiring or visionary or just practical as well, I think it's helpful.
Thank you. Anyone else, how you can influence when you're not in control, you don't have the authority? Gal?
Yeah, I think this is something I came across a lot with peers, like different designers or developers that I work with. So as Ilze said, it's definitely about storytelling and data. I try not to put too much graphs on the presentation, but rather actually take a customer story with the customer's data, trying to not say what they're doing exactly, but trying to tell a story of like, okay, if we take this edge case or we take this amount of cases and try to put them within their interface you're trying to design, does this still work? Does this break your idea? So instead of telling someone, okay, I think you've done this wrong, is telling like, okay, what if we take these and these examples, how would we put that in that situation? Would that still work? Or if I get some resistance from engineering around a certain feature idea, then okay, but if you have take a look at this data or this, what is the customer trying to achieve, can you help me try to figure out how we can still solve this problem? Because the fact is, it doesn't matter if this is the way you want to design it or this is the way you want to build it. There is a problem we're trying to solve, and the more tangible the problem is for either senior stakeholders or peers, it's more easy to solve.
Gal, can I play devil's advocate for a moment? And it's not personal at you, but I've worked with a lot of people over the years who, and that's no fault of their own, but they're much more inclined to think in terms of solutions. So even though, as you say, you try to really focus on the problem, and I agree, that's a great mechanism, if you like, to get people on board and take them on a journey with you. Kevin already knows what he wants. He's been in the industry for hundreds of years, like we said before, and he thinks in solutions. So he's thinking, Mark, why are you trying to work backwards and talk about problems? And any thoughts on that?
No, in that case, I would exactly use that tool, right? I would take the data and try to break the solution and say like, okay, does this still solve your problem?
Any other thoughts or experiences, do's and don'ts when it comes to influencing without authority? Blaine?
Yeah, don't get defensive. I think as a no and shutting that down. And I know in past and younger years of doing product management, that was kind of a really bad mistake I would do. I'd just go, you don't know product management, just go away. Yeah, so I've gotten a bit better at that. And I think it's just sort of down to, well, if someone's really clear on that solution, get them to generate the data with it the most cheapest way possible. So we go, well, we're not going to build it, but how can we test this on paper? How can we test this on this? So then they can actually get the data informed sort of in there instead of us trying to break their idea as well, because you can go both ways. And I find that usually when there's a stalemate, I go, well, what's the cheapest way to test it? And that seems to kind of break down and go, okay, cool, let's take our first step then, rather than trying to do the demands of the stakeholder.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about testing. Again, I learned the hard way, because I remember going to a first presentation about Lean Startup by Eric Ries many, many moons ago, and I'm going back into the office all excited and saying hypotheses and assumptions, and I'm like, what? Clearly hadn't been drinking the same Kool-Aid. But as soon as you start talking, to your point, Blaine, about risk and the problem that you're trying to solve and how testing might help to mitigate that risk, you've gone in there. I want to switch gears a little bit, because I want to talk about collaboration, and I think we touched on it really briefly, because what I've come across, and again I talk about this in the book, is that businesses have looked at Spotify, who have like a squad model. Again, for people watching this conversation not necessarily familiar with the so-called Spotify model, was never intended to be a model as such, but the idea is that you have a cross-functional team working on a particular product or a feature. So it's a combination of engineers, designers, a product person embedded in almost like a speedboat, an empowered kind of unit. But I wonder, and I'd be keen to hear your experiences with this, throw a bunch of people together and expect that it will just work and they will gel. I've seen it not work. What are your experiences in terms of looking at influencing, but particularly from a collaboration perspective?
I can go.
Yes, Gal.
We've changed from working in an isolated design team, a front-end team, a back-end team, to a Spotify model. And then sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think it only works when there's truly a respect between the different disciplines. So that's to the point of collaboration. So I think that the teams that worked really well are the ones that were not afraid of stepping into each other's shoes with respect to what are the boundaries. If I do part of the strategic together with product, if I get engineers involved in my UX solution, then we can really truly collaborate. Otherwise, it kind of becomes like a competition, even within the disciplines. And I think it also has to do with the company's mentality. So it's not just enough to change the model or change the teams. It's about actually understanding that multidisciplinary teams mean that all disciplines are participating and are part of the discussion.
And do we have any thoughts on how we build up that respect and that relationship with people, you know, who might not have worked with product people or product designers before in your case? And Ilze, I'd love to hear your thoughts if that's okay. Because let's assume, you know, I'm suddenly, I find myself in a squad with yourself. I know you're a director of product, but let's assume in your younger years, I'm actually that IT person that you just talked about. So imagine this being a checkered shirt, if that helps. Just teasing you. But, you know, I've never, you know, I'm thinking, what is a product manager in the first place? Respect? No, I write the code here. I'm way more important. Without me, Ilze is nowhere.
So I have a thing where I put the teams through a little boot camp almost together. So I do a little personality test and then like a basics like analysis of your strengths and weaknesses. And so in the end, I kind of figure out then how to put people together to work well together as well. And sometimes you have to put people together that has conflict, because then they'll also get better, because they need to work through their conflict. So I think the golden rule is we're all grown-ups. And like we're all professionals, so we need to figure out how to work. And then I like to use analogies always. So I think most teams are like bands. It's either a jazz band or a rock band or a punk band, but you need to be a band. So whatever your flavor is in the end, you need to be able to make music together, and you need to figure out how to do that. And some of you might be good musicians, and some of you might be bad musicians, but how do you kind of even it out so you can still actually do something together?
And that's interesting, because if we can build on that analogy, and after that, we'll see if there's any questions from the audience that we can throw into the mix. But I like particularly the jazz analogy, and I've written about that before. But for me, jazz, and I like jazz a lot, comes down to improvising a lot. You know, making things up, as you say. You don't have set roles necessarily. Everyone can jump in. And we deal a lot with people in our teams or outside our teams who are not necessarily comfortable with that, because they like to go for certainty. And suddenly, and as product people, you know, we find ourselves facing uncertainty. And again, forget about COVID. We face uncertainty at the best of times, right? How do we manage that in a team, Kevin? When you're dealing with people who are not so good at improvising or not necessarily at the creative end per se, and like that clarity that, you know, is sometimes hard to provide.
Totally. I do a similar kind of boot camp, but less so with the teams that are put together. But before they're put together, there is this. It's like Myers-Briggs, but I forget the actual name of this one, where they tell you what your top 5 traits are. So there's that person like myself who I thrive when there's nothing that is limitations. So like just blue sky brainstorming, and I make sure there's one of those in every single team, just so that that team doesn't get stagnant, so that there is not a status quo in each of these teams as they grow and develop. And I think that it's really helpful when you have new product development, and then I try to switch the balance if something needs to be maintained long term or super dynamic and flexible.
Excellent. That's great. I like that, because I think for what you're saying is, if you're the blue sky thinker, you also need a bit of a naysayer on the team who will bring you back to reality or talk about constraints to even things out, as we said before. Is that excellent? Anyone else, any thoughts on how you manage that tension between that desire, primal desire for certainty and clarity, and, you know, the very nature of what we do? I call it knitting spaghetti in the book, where there is a lot of uncertainty, but also cool creativity, right? Where you're not necessarily sure where things are going to go, especially if you're testing, as you say, Blaine. How do you manage that?
Yeah, it's a hard one. I mean, personally, I feel it's a really major role of a product manager to kind of shape that together, provide the boundaries of the plate of the spaghetti per se, right? It's all going to go in there. And then really just lean in on the team members where they really have that expertise regardless. So even if you have the blue sky engineer and the strict engineer who needs certainty, lean on that, because they're really going to go, hey, this is amazing. And then the other one that's actually more strict about how we're going to do this, what's the timeline. And you just, you let that sizzle for a bit, and you really sort of drive that. I generally find that if you can give the boundaries for people to play, like, you know, the genre of music, then and understand that, okay, you are a drummer, so, you know, you're going to take care of our percussion. People do find their way, but you can't just let the spaghetti fly onto the wall. Like, there has to be the plate, and I think that's a really part of the product management role, to really bring that together.
And in your mind, if I'm the drummer and that's my role in the band, how do you feel if I suddenly decide to pick up the microphone and sing? Not me personally, because I'm an awful singer.
Well, that's when I'd say you're a musician, right? So, you know, a drummer, a violinist, and everyone, they're a musician, so they all understand the underlying concept. So you can share, you can open up. And I think that's where the creativity comes into play.
Excellent. I hope, and I don't know how this is going to work, but I've got my sisters helping me with any audience questions. It's a true family operation today. I hope you're aware of that. Makes it extra special. Any questions? No questions just yet? Okay, that means I can ask a few more questions. Again, this is the honesty round, if that's okay. And when was the last time you felt overwhelmed as a product person? Because it's easy, I think, in my experience, and lots of people I interviewed for the book work, really senior product people working in amazing companies. They told me, yes, it is overwhelming. Yes, there is a lot to deal with on a daily basis. When was the last time you felt overwhelmed? Again, for me, it was yesterday. It can be brief, but I would like you to share.
Yeah, I think this happened for me yesterday as well. We're planning for the new year, and I think as we all feel in our personal lives, but especially at work, it's quite hard to plan for anything right now. So we're trying to predict customer behavior, customer needs, intentions, so that we can alleviate them as UX and as product teams. And I'm trying to kind of hire the right person to predict these needs and solve them. And it's quite difficult when you don't know if the markets will go up or down, if people are going to buy anything, if people will be able to travel again. There's a lot of new tensions.
Okay. Anyone else? You felt overwhelmed?
Well, today.
Tell me.
And yesterday and every day. Well, I'm taking two hats in my role right now. I have a domain that I'm responsible for, but I'm also responsible for trying to get a new architecture and new navigation for two different products combined together. So I need to balance my time between my work with the developers in my team and reviewing PRs and making sure there's no bugs, but also trying to think long term and do workshop with the entire design team, get stakeholders together. So this is extremely overwhelming, and then saying yes to come to a panel discussion and maybe presenting yesterday in a town hall and just taking more tasks and tasks. But I strive in this situation. This is where I'm mostly motivated and happy, because then I have the energy of doing, where I've had periods that are more calm, and then I kind of lose my my patience to tasks. I don't know if that's just me or it's a trait that a lot of people have, but it's a good tension.
Excellent. Ilze, you have a thoughtful face. Are you still thinking about the last time you're feeling overwhelmed?
I think it's a constant state. If you choose this profession in some way, that this is the state that you have to kind of get used to. But also you get product managers who will make their scope smaller to feel less overwhelmed. So I think it's like you said, is you're either addicted to the fact that you've got like something big that you need to solve and it puts that tension on you, or you can really cut down your scope considerably to deal with it as well. But I think most product people kind of addicted to that sense of overwhelmedness.
Have we got any, as a panel, any tips? And we'll go to the question in a moment. My sister is kind of nudging me like only sisters can. But I'm curious, have we got any tips? Because I can imagine there's people watching today or hopefully days to come where they think, yeah, that's all well and good. But at the moment, I really feel overwhelmed as a product person. Maybe if you're less experienced or you're starting a new role. Have you got any tips in terms of dealing with that? If you're saying Ilze, and I agree with you, is a state of mind and state of being for a product person. Any practical tips that you can share?
So for me, I run, and if I run, it's almost like I synthesize the ideas and I figure out what to do with it. And I know some people walk, other people go to yoga, but I think you need that space in your head of an hour or two where it's kind of noiseless in a way, and you can kind of look through this kind of storyboard of the things that you need to do and just figure out what is really important, what is not important. And I think that space that you create is really important to keep sane, especially in the times that we're in right now.
Kevin or Gal or Blaine, any thoughts for people watching or struggling with that? So many balls to keep up in the air.
Own your own time. You actually own that, no one else does. And given the fact that we're talking to so many people, you actually can't have them take that away from you. I think once you take that back and say, hey, listen, look, I'm not going to be part of that meeting. You guys are actually okay. We can catch up for 10 minutes afterwards. Because I find that your week can just literally be taken up with meetings, so you don't get to do the deep work, like going for the run thinking. So if you are really overwhelmed, it's probably because you haven't had the time to relax, process, digest, and get it out. So own that time and get good at saying no to meetings, I think is the primary one.
We'll definitely come back to saying no, but I just, any other thoughts on not feeling overwhelmed?
Yeah, I have one. I like to do role play with the teams. So it's a habit I picked up in California, given how many propositions go up for voting every year. So we have these proposition parties where everyone has to represent one proposition for and against. And so I like the team to represent personas and then rank order the priorities per page and then see how everyone kind of collides together. And if you step back after playing a role you didn't necessarily, that wasn't your personal opinion, you now see from different perspectives, and then you mix those ideas together.
It's a nice way to help with that empathy piece as well. I have to be honest, I'm like you, Kevin, I do a lot of role play, and I think it must drive my team members nuts. But the other reason why I do it is to preempt them for any challenging conversations or interactions they might have, and to, rehearse that, not rehearse, but go through that and have that, develop that empathy in a safe space. So yeah, I really believe in that. I'm looking at my sister because there's a question which is amazing.
There's two questions actually. One is from AC, that reads, how do you make the bridge from an individual contributor to product manager, to someone that leads a product team, and what tensions can you expect there?
Okay, so this is a question from AC who says, especially if you think about the transition that some of us have made from an individual contributor working with a team to a product leader, and the tension that come with that transition.
Yeah, I mean, I recently did that. So I think what happens is that your entire scope of what you have to think about explodes. That's the tension of it. You are like, hey, cool, I'm focused on this one thing, this one customer problem, and the needs of sort of the stakeholder of the business, this more strategic, high-level stuff just isn't there. But then when you make the jump, it's a chasm. It's so huge. And I think the tension is literally you are really in the deep end, and there's a really great community to help you, but there isn't actually a proper teaching methodology to go, okay, here's how you go from an IC to a leader. So yeah, you sink or swim. That's the tension. It's hard, and I think I got through it by actually just education. I really just had to knuckle down and learn really quickly about what I need to really think about and how to really make that transition.
Excellent. Anyone else with that transition and some of the tensions that come with that?
I think you should first be okay that you're going to suck at it for a very long time, and you're going to be really bad at it, and then you need to be okay with it, you're going to be bad at it. And then I think seek help is the next one, is find people that you can look up to, that you can ask for help, because I think you put a lot of pressure on yourself initially to make that jump and be great at it, because you've read all the books, you're ready, and then you fall flat on your face. Managing people is hard. So I think the best thing is seek help and be okay to suck for a while until you get better at it.
And interesting, on that note of seeking help, because I write about that in the book. I totally agree. It's really important because I think it's fair to say that being in product with a designer, product manager can be quite a lonely job. But how do you go about, I call it finding a safety net in the book, but how do you go about seeking help? Have you got any examples? Because, let's assume role play here. I've never asked for help. I thought I was supposed to have all the answers and be the master of everything, but now Ilze is telling me I should ask for help, and she's right, but I don't know how to do it. And who should I ask? And Blaine is...
Well, I asked you, because I remember you giving the one-to-one sort of sessions here, so there's a lot of people doing that.
What's that?
Where there's the one-to-one sessions that people actually provide out there. There's a lot
Yes.
of people out there that are giving these moments for you to connect with them.
Absolutely, and that's how Blaine and I met. Because that's one way, especially if you can find people outside of your day job who might have a fresh perspective and can act as a sounding board, is in a one-to-one, as a coach, as a mentor, and you could argue there's a distinction between the two. But that's absolutely one way. I have to give a shout out to my Mind the Product crew, because what we try to do there is create that community buy-in for product people, so that it's easier to at least identify who a potential sounding board could be, because it's not always that easy to find on LinkedIn. It doesn't say Kevin Hawkins sounding board for starting designers. Speaking of LinkedIn, if you have questions and you're struggling to call the number or YouTube, you can also drop me a message and I'll have a look. But any other thoughts on that safety net and asking for help?
Yeah, I would be remiss not to mention that the startup I work for, bookclub.com, does a really good job of doing things like this. I think the idea that we will know everyone to talk to who can be our coach is sometimes a privilege in big cities, but with tech, we can really reach out to experts all over the world. And so you have TED and you have Masterclass, and these are great platforms, but we're actually making a platform where all the authors who you're like, oh, this is an amazing advice, but what if you could get that person one-on-one? And so I think the idea of sending out cold messages is one of the biggest things that I've worked for my career. Just sending random cold messages to people who you thought would never respond and just asking. Yeah. So just like we talk to our customers, we say always talk to your customers, talk to your experts. Just go reach out to these people.
Gal, any thoughts on asking for help?
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of the time I've been reluctant on asking for help, especially when I would feel, maybe people don't think I know what I'm responsible for. But I actually realized that all the tools that we have, especially as designer, to facilitate workshop with our Scrum team, so having developers come up with solutions for patterns, having a workshop with customer success managers or sale, bringing up ideas, pair designing with another designer. So developers do it a lot, right? They do pair coding, pair designing, so thinking of a problem from two people and doing a collaborative sketching session helps a lot. I think that the main thing is learning that asking for help doesn't mean anything about how skilled you are, and admitting when you don't know something helps you grow much more, and also opens a channel of communication with the people you work with in a much better way.
That's such a, I think we can all look at the facial expressions there, but that's such a critical point, that feeling comfortable saying, I don't know, or I'm going to ask for help. Thank you so much. There's another question.
I'm trying to, yes, I'm working it out, sorry. So, this is my struggle of the day. So I've got a question from a digital business manager who's asking, or is actually experiencing tension between bug fixing on the one hand and stabilizing the platform and innovation on the other side. So how to find the right balance between the two?
$1 million question. Any thoughts? I do that classical product management thing where I try to have two streams at any given time, because I do believe that if you manage a product, you do need to carve out some time, call it hygiene, business as usual. The only risk is, and that's where, again, the challenge comes in terms of the balance, because what I don't want to do, that's not why I became a product person, and that's, I don't think what a business or a customer wants from me, is just tinkering, just fixing and not doing anything that really moves a product or an experience forward. But how do you do that to this question about, you know, the bug fixes versus the exciting, sexy stuff?
Exciting, sexy bug fixes. I do a rank order system, and it's very, very hard. I learned this from a mentor of mine, where if you have a huge challenge, that I think we oftentimes compartmentalize. So we say these are the bugs, and then these are the new stories, and I'm actually forced to put them all together in rank order, top to bottom, let's say, per priority. So we will say, you know, we have to get to this goal by this date, reverse engineer the dates you have, and then prioritize, and then you let people critique that, like very, very heavily, versus I think what happens a lot is people go into a room, make these priorities, and then they never talk about it, and you're forced to live in this world of priorities.
Excellent, thank you for that. We're going to come back on the critique part. Any other thoughts on how we find that balance? I was so worried about passing microphones. It's so good that we've got plenty of sanitizers. I've got wipes here. We'll be good.
So I think it's super interesting because I used to be quite rigid in prioritization of this, but it depends on your business. If you've got a business that needs shiny things to propel it forward, then potentially you're going to have to deal with the bugs later and you have to focus on the shiny things. Or if you have a platform that you're trying to stabilize, well, then your bugs are important and you need to fix them. So I think it's more about what do you want to achieve with your business, and then how do you put your resources, than saying, okay, I'm going to split my teams by X and do the right things. I think inherently I'm a quality person, so I want to build quality products. But sometimes you have to kind of put that aside and say, well, I'm not going to get any funding if I keep on building quality. I need to build shiny things. So I think that's the tension sometimes you need to think about.
Thank you. No, absolutely. But maybe switching gears on that, because I like the point about the critiquing, because that's a skill in itself. And again, cover it in the book, because it's really important when we talk about mind and moves, particularly. I find that lots comes down to giving and receiving feedback. Now, I'll tell you quite honestly, and I'm quite open about it, it's in the book too, where I'm from the Netherlands. Low context culture, as you probably experienced by now, right? It's fair to say. In your face, direct, no is no. And there's no, you know, I loved it when I first came to the UK and I would talk to people and explain something and they would say, yeah, that's interesting. And I thought, yeah, they think it's really interesting. I'm on to a winner. What they were trying to say is that's an absolutely rubbish, crap idea. But, you know, that's what I learned. But how do you particularly, you know, it might be relevant, I don't know, for instance, how many Dutchies you work with, or, you know, how risky it is to create an environment where you can critique ideas or decisions and people just bulldoze other people or it gets out of hand. Any experiences, Gal?
I feel like I must take this one, because I'm an Israeli in the Netherlands working for an American company.
Double trouble. Triple trouble.
I remember that first week that I've joined this company, I asked the designer who was coaching me, how did he think I'm doing? Like, honestly. He said, like, I think you're doing great. But you know, Gal, Dutch people are very direct. You are super direct. And I just landed here from Israel. I was like, I thought I was like a super like shy person when I first came here. So I've realized that cultural difference is huge. And then 2 years ago, we got acquired by an American company, and that changed the game for me completely. Because again, when someone says it's interesting or great questions, it means something completely different than what I knew before. And how I deal with it is that I say it as the first thing. So I had the first call with the VP of product design at the company that acquired us. And she asked me how I'm doing, and I wasn't doing that well at that time. But the first thing I told her is like, listen, you asked me for feedback. I'm going to genuinely tell you how I feel. I don't want you to perceive this as rudeness, because I do think, like, not to say the cliche, but feedback is a gift in a way. And I respect when someone asks for my opinion, the fact that they need to know what could be done better. And of course, there's a way to say things, and you should be nice about it and respectful of the work that they've done. But if you want to make things better, I feel like I owe it to my colleagues and peers to actually give them my genuine feedback. So I warn them that that's what they ask for, that's what they're going to get. And then, in the meanwhile, try to teach myself what each context of each culture means when they give me a certain feedback as well.
Amazing. Thank you. Yeah, you and I should be friends, Gal. Compare notes on how to manage these situations. But joking aside, is how do we create a safe environment? You know, people talk a lot about psychological safety, but what can we do as product people, as leaders, or people influencing other people to create the circumstances, even with some of the, without some of the workarounds of explaining on a one-to-one basis, where people feel safe in challenging a CEO or a founder or just a smart colleague? And any tips and tricks there?
What I try to do is structure the conversation. I mean, I love Miro. They're like my all-time favorite thing for structuring the conversation that needs to be had and giving everyone the opportunity to contribute within that structure, because it's not a loud voice overtaking everyone. It's actually you go through everyone's options discussion and you just let that be. You let it sit there. You don't let the discussion happen around it, and so everyone can just take it and absorb it. And I think by removing maybe the groupthink or the sheep, Kiwi, so it comes to mind, that essentially, you just get everyone's idea on the table, and then you go, that's great, and then we'll tackle that next time. So you just get it out there and don't let the debate happen straight away. I think because people can synthesize, digest, go walk away from it, then come back better informed.
Excellent. Any other tips for creating that safe environment? Kevin, how do you do it when you, again, that's quite a thing, right? If you have people critiquing ideas and stack ranking them, how do you do that in such a way that people don't end up fighting each other in the room or afterwards around the water cooler?
Yeah, I think context is super important. As we mentioned, the structure really helps. I think that whenever an idea is presented to a room that's cross-functional, you present the context and the problem and the feedback you're looking for first, and therefore it tries to create a common playing field for the feedback and also for the goal that's in mind. Doesn't always work, but I think that debate should happen afterwards, but critique should happen in the room.
Excellent. And I don't know if I looked at my LinkedIn to see if there are any questions. Any questions? Because we're going to do last one or two questions, if that's okay. Because where do you draw the line, a bit like we're talking about critiquing, between healthy and unhealthy tension? Deep sigh. From your experience, Ilze?
I don't know. I think it's incredibly difficult, to be honest with you, at the moment. I work in the travel industry. I cannot explain to you the type of tension that people are feeling in this industry at the moment. And I think if you're working in the food delivery industry, restaurants, anything. So I would say that at the moment, there is no good answer to this. If you look at your teams as well, there's a somehow that you need to get used to the new normal for a while until things kind of stabilizes. And it's more kind of how are you empathetic as a leader now, and how are you understanding, and how do you still try and motivate your teams to do the right thing and to move forward when they feel kind of negative tension. Because people's tension is weird now as well. It's not just about their products or about their professional life. I have a colleague who's got 3 little kids and a tiny Amsterdam flat. Imagine her life. She must be losing her mind. So there's a lot of things to consider now outside of just the professional tension that you feel.
Any other thoughts on that tension and how we make sure that we keep an eye on healthy versus unhealthy tension? Because I'll tell you, if it helps, unhealthy tension, and again I have some case studies, shall we say, real life examples in the book of people shouting at each other. So again, it's not even about the message per se, but it gets beyond that because people start getting really verbally aggressive. And I've also been on that side, full disclosure. So how do you make sure that you don't, you keep a balance between, like Ilze said, healthy and unhealthy tension? Gal?
I feel like one of the biggest challenges we have right now, besides the worried about the industry or what's going on with the world or your personal tension, there is, for me, a big struggle that I've noticed working remotely is that there are a lot of conversations happening in closed rooms, more so than others, and there's a lot of tension build up around those decisions being made and people not being included in those decisions, and that's one of the biggest struggles we have right now. And so far I've discovered that, connected to the last topic, when you put the cards on the table and you say, I know that this and this, or that person said that, or I know that there's a conversation around that, and really address the problem with the people instead of trying to go around it, helps reduce the tension. Because I've just this week learned that something that I thought was a major issue, that all the teams are super not aligned, and something is like, the house is going to go on fire, is in a much better situation than I realized while interviewing and talking to the team and actually asking them their opinion, and also sometimes just putting a mirror saying, like, have you thought about this? Instead of going around making assumptions how everybody else is having a conspiracy theory against your problem and what you're trying to solve.
Excellent, love that, thank you. And final point, and final question, because I'm conscious of time, but and this was quite a revelation for me as well, because I really used to dread tension, but then over the last few years and thinking about it and trying some of the things that we talked about today, I realized that tension can actually be a good thing for creativity, for solving problems, for innovation, as we talked about. Just your final thoughts to wrap things up today. When was the last time you maybe deliberately threw in a bit of tension? You called it letting things sizzle for a bit. And what tips have you got for people watching and thinking about this, to not let that tension that you've maybe created or nudged a little bit, shall we say, to get out of hand? Kevin? Yeah?
The tension that I like to create are deadlines that are not real deadlines.
Classic.
I personally thrive on deadlines, and I think I make a habit of having one-on-ones that people don't expect. I have one-on-ones with random people in the company. I make everyone sit in what is the most grueling role. So if there's a service-based company, everyone plays customer service support within their first week, and then does it again at least once a quarter. And then second, I make deadlines where I'm like, now that you have this new context perspective, you have 5 days to collaborate and come up with a better solution and see how fast the decision-making changes.
So you're almost kind of deliberately introducing certain constraints. It's not even about the deadline, but it's just interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Blaine, talk a bit more about letting things sizzle.
Yeah, I think you just got to throw it out there. And I actually incorporate the power of silence as well. Like, don't try to jump in there, really just let it sizzle out. And give it that time. And I think, if you're going to throw it out there, you also have to rein it in. Like, if it's actually going to go too far, you go, okay, cool, hey, let's put a peg in it. Obviously, there's different opinions there. Let's do a constructive conversation about this later on. But I think, a lot of the time, like when someone's sort of, having this sort of discussion or point, just give that sort of 2, 3, 4 second silence and then go, okay, cool, nice. And you just sort of, run out of steam, it's all good. And then you can move that conversation on.
Cool. And Gala, and I'm very conscious that you and I might have a slightly different perception of tension and what that could look like. How do you introduce, when you think, being creative and you're designing, how do you introduce a bit of tension to get people to think more creatively or to challenge your ideas maybe?
Yeah, I think, first of all, the thing that I do around tension a lot is towards myself. So I'm a big advocate for thinking long-term while we're working on short-term. And so I make sure that in order to not miss out on the opportunity to think long-term, I make fake deadlines for myself, or I'll make a meeting where I have to present this long-term thing that is not urgent at all. But if I don't put the deadline for myself, then I had no stress and no tension. I just won't deliver it ever. So that's the first thing. And then I think the second thing is within a meeting, I am the person who creates the tension for sure. I'll play devil advocates every day, and I think that's what you're probably referring to. But that's a risky one, and I'm trying also, it's something that I learn every day, how to mitigate and how to read the room better and try to understand where can I throw a conversation changer and where should I afterwards, after the meeting, come to the person or Slack them and asking them or giving them my perspective or my ideas.
Excellent. Last but not least, Ilze. When was the last time you introduced a bit of tension?
I don't actually like tension, to be honest. I like accountability. So I think how I framed it, because a developer came to me and said, all these artificial deadlines, what's the point? Nobody's going to die. I said, well, that's absolutely true, but if you said you can do it, then you're accountable for it. So it's almost like, how do you hold yourself accountable to the thing that you said you're going to do? And if you can do that, great. And if you can't do that, then we have a conversation. So I think it's more about all of us, if we're in this role, it's because we're competitive and we want to finish something or deliver something or release something. So you need that accountability in your team. So I would say I frame it rather as ownership and accountability than tension, because I don't really like tension, to be honest, in the workplace. I like people to be empowered and accountable for what they do.
Excellent. On that note, I just want to thank you all so much for being here for the book launch, sharing your honest views on tension, how you deal with it, sharing some tools and techniques. Really appreciate it. And yeah, all I can say is I'm really excited that this book is here. So I need to say a few thank yous and a few shout outs to all the great people who I've interviewed for the book. If I list them all out today, which I'd love to, I'd probably be here for a few more hours. But amazing product people working for some amazing companies like Shopify, like Microsoft, like Facebook, but also all the people who helped me edit the book. Because, even more than my first book, this was a labor of love and a bit of tenacity in terms of going through all the proofreads. I have to thank my family back in London, allowed me to do this on Saturday mornings in crazy hours of the day. My mom, my sisters, not only for today, obviously helping with the questions and some of the logistics, and the editor, Jonathan, who helped me a lot with the structure of the book. Rachel, second time, Rachel has done the illustrations in my book, so thank you so much, Rachel. But again, thank you so much for being here with me today. This is as I said at the beginning of today, this book is special to me. It's something I really wanted to write about. I really wanted to launch the book formally. It's been on Amazon for 2 months now, and it's doing really well, but I really want to do a proper book launch, feel like a proper grown-up. And I can't thank you enough for being on the panel and for sharing today. And thank you all at home or in the office or wherever you are for watching today. I really hope you find it useful. Please drop me a line. My site is marcabraham.com. You can find me on LinkedIn or on Twitter and Medium. If you've got questions, if you want to know more about the book, any thoughts following this conversation, if you want to follow up with people individually. But thank you again for joining. And I'm going to give you a big clap because I really appreciate you being here today. And also a clap for all the people watching, audience at home. And for Scheltema, last but not least, because this is amazing. Thank you, Joost. Thank you, Roos, for organizing all the logistics, the microphones, moving the sofas around. Thank you so much. Have a nice day or evening. And thank you.